Okay, on behalf of the Planetary Guardians, it is our pleasure to be speaking to you today. Throughout the session, we will address some of the existential threats now facing our home, planet Earth, and explore the ways in which modern science and traditional indigenous communities, their wisdom, together can be an unlikely but yet perfect solution to some of the challenges that humanity has today. We are putting the stability of the entire planet at risk. Johan Rockström and a group of 28 scientists have created a framework called the Planetary Planetary Boundaries, which scientifically highlights the risks and implications of our current interactions with the planet. 6 of these 9 planetary boundaries that regulate the health of the planet are, at this moment, breached. The planet is giving us a red alert. We have 5 years to change course, and we will only make it if we collaborate at a scale that we cannot really imagine right now. When we first started the Guardians, we agreed that we would ground our work in listening to 3 things: science, nature, and traditional wisdom. I found that out during my presidency, when I learned from the most pure indigenous community, that pure in the sense of maintaining their culture, called the Kogi in the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta. They started saying, listen, Mr. President, you make peace with the guerrillas, but that peace is not important if you don't make peace with nature. So they gave me a mandate of making peace with nature. And they said, nature will let you know why she is mad. And a few days later, the worst Niña phenomenon hit Colombia. And I had no idea of how to handle that, so I brought in the scientists, the people who knew what exactly was happening. Among those, he's not a scientist, but he's an expert, was Al Gore. So I had a personal experience: science, indigenous wisdom, and Mother Nature speaking out. And that's what we are hearing right now in this world, and that is what we are all working for. Today we have an extraordinary group of some of the very best modern scientists who have all grounded their work in listening and learning from nature and from indigenous people. We have also some of the very best leaders whose lives have been shaped by traditional wisdom. We are excited to hear from both of them about the beautiful alchemy that gets created when modern science and traditional wisdom join forces. I'd like to invite our chair, the chair of the Planetary Guardians, Hindu, Omaru Ibrahim, just to say a few words. Hindu.
Thank you very much, President Santos, and thank you all the Guardians. This is really a very important moment to discuss around the traditional knowledge or knowledge of indigenous peoples and the science knowledge, how we can use both together to really tackle the crisis that we have. As an indigenous woman, so I always say we cannot respond in silo to each crisis. Everything is interconnected, and it is a holistic visions and holistic response that we need all collectively. One of my experience of putting together the knowledge of my people are nomadic pastoralists around all the Sahel regions. They is still nomadic 100% in our communities, moving from one place to another one. So we do have a lot of knowledge. We do not have technology, we do not have electricity even, but we understand the nature. We understand if we have to move from one region to another one, from one ecosystem to another one, in order to find water and pastures for our cattle, for ourselves, and also to run our economy. So for me, how I really say to value those knowledge and to help my community to better get resilience from the human impact to the species, it's to use this science. So one of my exercises is doing a participatory mapping. So I use the satellite image, I print it in a bigger scale, I go to the communities. The last one I did is 3,500 kilometers squares. But when I take this satellite image to the communities, maybe the scientists can say there is a lot of data, but it's nothing compared to the community's data. Then communities start putting like the different kind of the trees, of the plants, the one they do not touch, the sacred plant, the different kind of the water. I cannot translate it into the French or English language because we have so many. So at the end of the day, it's helped the community to say, we need to better restore this part, not that part, as they said. So they really understand. We can put the science together, traditional knowledge together. But it is also the science who have to adapt to the communities, but not say they have to confirm the community knowledge, because we do have the knowledge for really centuries and centuries. So this is so crucial to see how we can hear from the experiences of it. So I have a couple of questions that maybe I can really go through all of you. Briefly, we can see what you think about it. So firstly, I wanted to jump to you, David Suzuki. Yes, I wanted really to hear from you. What is your experience to put the wisdom, knowledge of indigenous peoples and the science knowledge and work together? And then I can jump back and forward.
Well, I'm a scientist. When I had studied for 8 years in the United States, then I returned to Canada and I thought, oh boy, I'm going to be this famous scientist. And the year I returned, 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, all about the ineffective pesticides on nature. And I realized, reading that, science is very powerful, but we look at nature in bits and pieces. And that what we see doesn't include the context. You can study the effect of DDT in a Florence flask or in a growth chamber. But in the real world, it rains, it snows, the wind blows, and you end up affecting birds and humans. We didn't know about biomagnification as a biological phenomenon. So then I realized that there's more to science when you begin to look at the bigger world. That powerful as it is, we need something else to guide us in the bigger picture, and that is the people who've lived in place for thousands of years. Now, you know, in Brundtland's 1987 report for the UN, Our Common Future, she says right there, indigenous people are the only ones with a track record of living in place for thousands of years.
Yes.
And when we lose indigenous people, we lose knowledge that will never be replaced by science. So I believe we need two things. We need the science to tell us in detail about specific issues, but overall we need the guidance of the indigenous way of knowing about place. And that's what the Mi'kmaq elder, Albert Marshall in Canada says. We need two-eyed seeing. We need the eye of indigenous cultures to guide the other eye of science that gives us information.
Oh my God, I love that, David. As scientists, and you are saying that we need these thousands of years of knowledge, and with the science, and we need the guidance and the wisdom of indigenous peoples, I really feel much better now, and because this is the collaboration we are really looking on it. Sylvia, we all know your passions of oceans. And then, as you know, the indigenous peoples who are living across all oceans, we always taking care of the corals, because we know that when we take care of the corals, they can take care of the fish and then etc. all the ecosystems. What do you think about the way of indigenous peoples protecting the oceans? Is that can be helpful to really, with the science, to take us out of this crisis?
We live at this crossroads in history when, as never before, we have knowledge that has been gathered over the history of humankind. We prosper because we learn things, pass it along to the next generation. And we are today the beneficiary of the ancient wisdom of people who have learned to live in harmony with nature over long periods of time. Right now, I'm encouraged about the awakening of the need to listen to the indigenous voices. Those people who are still with us, who've lived in harmony, have so much to share about respect for nature. It's more than just knowledge, it's values, it's the attitude, it's respect for nature, respect for the unknown. I'm troubled in some measure because while there is increasing listening to voices from the land, people of the sea have not been given comparable respect. And for example, across the Pacific, the Polynesian culture has existed for thousands of years with little bits of land and the ocean. Their home is blue, and it's not just in the Pacific. It's everywhere that you have these island nations who have lived, again, with a harmonious relationship with the sea. The voyagers who cross the ocean using the stars and the waves and knowledge of life in the sea as their way to guide over long distances. I mean, the ocean separates us, but it also unites us. And the knowledge that we now have that complements what not only no indigenous people could ever understand before, but that we now have the capacity to weave together with the values that come from living in harmony with nature, with knowing what Earth looks like from space, with knowing what causes Earth to have a climate, to know that there's life in the ocean as far down as the ocean exists. The technology that enables us to look into the sky and see it's beautiful, but there's nothing else out there like this ocean planet. And knowing that the ocean really makes our existence possible, and that we have to take care of it and listen to the people of the sea, instead of thinking that we can take anything we want out of the ocean or use the ocean to dump things that we don't want close to the land, and to realize the limits of our expectations for what we can derive from nature. Most important thing we take from nature, it's not oil or gas or trees or fish or whatever it is that we take. It's our existence. And that we have to learn, have learned, and need to really take it to heart. And the knowledge that we now have that's possible only because of technology that did not exist until right about now, the responsible use of technology, and couple that with the values and the understanding of respecting nature as if our lives depend on it, because of course they do.
Thank you, Sylvia. I love the point. We have to respect the peoples of the oceans.
Yes.
And those who are using not the Google map, but the star to navigate the wave to live.
And the navigation pathways that those who've made these long distance voyages, now we see, the whales figured that out a long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
and the sharks,
Yes.
and the turtles, and these other creatures, and to realize what we didn't know before, that the greatest migration on Earth
Yeah.
is at the twilight zone in the ocean that is connected to climate. Migrations of animals that live just at the edge of light, coming back to the surface at night to feed on the results of photosynthesis by those microorganisms that generate more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere and capture carbon. This is a climate issue. Taking care of the ocean,
Yeah.
respecting those other nations called whales, called turtles, called tuna, called coral reefs, called whatever it is.
Yeah.
Life in the sea.
I really appreciate this is the other nation, as we said. I know we have like a short time, but I wanted to hear from three of you too. Carlos, as we are talking about biodiversity and we are talking about the green economy, we know that the critical minerals are in high spot biodiversity. So when we wanted to have them, we are also going to destroy the home of indigenous peoples, and that's what is happening also in all around Amazon. How do you think that we can combine respect the indigenous people's home and also that go to these just transitions with the critical minerals? Do you think that it is possible to combine that?
Yes, for sure. When we look at indigenous people in the Amazon, they arrived in the Amazon 14,000 years ago. And they developed their indigenous knowledge, the indigenous science. They use more than 2,300 products, 1,400 medicinal plants, 250 fruits, fantastic knowledge. In the indigenous people, most knowledge was generated by women. For instance, they created 14 varieties of cocoa, 700 varieties of manioc. This is all indigenous science. They started developing agroforestry systems 8,000 years ago. They domesticated more than 100 trees and other plants. So this is fantastic indigenous knowledge. Unfortunately, the European colonizers completely ignored indigenous knowledge when they came. And so we have to learn. And of course, I mean, there is plenty of minerals. We do not have to explore minerals in indigenous territories. There is plenty. So that's not really, that should not be a problem. Unfortunately, in all of the Amazon, criminals, they invaded indigenous territories for illegal gold mining. This is terrible. It's leading to terrible problem for the health of indigenous people in the Amazon. I just want to finalize saying, for the Amazon, we need really to develop a new, we call bioeconomy of social biodiversity. So based on the knowledge of indigenous people, we have to give rise to, hundreds and hundreds of products from the forest, keeping the forest, agroforest systems, and then, of course, we can merge with our modern science, let's say, to add value, to industrialize. So we have to do that in the Amazon. We call this new social bioeconomy of standing forests and flowing rivers. And then I say, final, that our science is also very important. Why? Because unfortunately, colonizers brought a lot of diseases. Measles, the virus, killed tens of thousands of indigenous people since the Portuguese and Spanish came to the Amazon, to South America. Fortunately, now we have vaccines. So we have to bring vaccines also to save the indigenous people. So this is the right combination of our science with the indigenous knowledge.
Great. So my two last. Fariza, you really come from Indonesia. So may you just tell us what is the wisdom or stewardship of indigenous peoples around peatland that is very important for us?
You know, one thing that a whole lot of conversations happened around indigenous community knowledge and science is really around how the indigenous community knows exactly how to work with the land and the ocean and the islands. They know what could happen where and when. They understand how there's certain time of the year when the elephant would move through the forest, and therefore it's times when people should not be planting bananas for fear that elephants would just eat them all and harvest it, and also understanding how the relationship between wildlife and humans and its environment. And this is the kind of relationship that are yet to be captured by our policy makers. And this is the kind of knowledge that it's unfortunate that how we see the movement of wildlife, instead of listening to the people who have lived there for thousands of years and understand how this wildlife moves and how we need to organize our life around where wildlife moves so we don't come into conflict with them. That is not yet incorporated into our policy making. So in Indonesia, something as small as, if you go, a lot of people travel to Bali these days, right? And if you go to Bali, you might admire the rice terrace and how rice is grown over what look like stairs. These are part of local indigenous knowledge that has been incorporated into our relations to the food system and agriculture. And this is how we could minimize the use of pesticides, irrigations, and optimize the production of food for the local communities. And truly, that relationship, that ways of knowing, that we need to learn to listen more to the people who have known this for the longest of time.
Well, especially listening, that's what President Santos is saying, like he listened to indigenous peoples and then it's catch them. Maybe do you want to share with us maybe quickly what do you think that the world can learn from the wisdom of our ancestors, and then President Santos can take us through the final.
I just want to remind all of us that, as you said today, we all come from Africa. So we are all Africans in this room. And our ancient African ancestors are the originators of what we now call modern science. They didn't have telescopes, but they read the stars and their movement, and they were guided by that on the banks of the Nile River, on the ebbs and flows, and that's why they could have food security, they could live in harmony with nature. No scientist today has managed to replicate the building of the pyramids, which are configured along the constellation of the stars. They, up to today, modern technology cannot replicate that sophisticated science. What I want to encourage us to look at, the avoidance of associating indigeneity with science is part of the racist agenda that said that Africa was a dark continent with no history, with no religion, with no knowledge. So I would like us as Planetary Guardians to re-embrace ancient science and the wisdom that came from the way our ancestors, our common ancestors, did science. They didn't put it in boxes of disciplines. They didn't put it in boxes of practical, and it was all holistic. So the whole planet approach that we now are wanting to re-embrace comes from that. So it's not that they said they've got a kind of mystical way of knowing. They have a scientific basis for how they migrate and when they migrate, and the relationships, not only between us as the human species with other living species, but to do it in a way that respects and promotes well-being for all on a healthy planet.
President Santos.
That's it.
Giving back to you.
About learning from the indigenous communities, my experience has been very, very compelling, and that's why I'm Planetary Guardian. When I went to the indigenous community for the first time and they warned me about Mother Nature being mad, they also gave me a mandate. And they said, you need to finish the war that we had in Colombia with the FARC, but that war is secondary to peace with nature. And they gave me a baton. And they said, bring back when the mandate is fulfilled and when you finish your term. 8 years later, I went, 2017. And I took the peace agreement with the FARC, which all the world has applauded,
Awesome.
and the SDGs that were approved here in New York in 2015 by every single country. And why did I take the SDGs? Because that was a Colombian initiative. That was the concept approved in Rio +20 summit in 2012. And then the negotiations of how many and which, and we ended up with the 17. So I very proudly took them, the two documents, and said, here is your mandate fulfilled. And they said, because they are our older brothers, they said, come back in a week, Mr. President. And I went back. I was still president. I went back. And they said, the peace agreement with the FARC was perfect. No, we have no comment. But the SDGs, they are lacking the most important, the most fundamental factor. And I said, but every single nation participated in the construction of this document and this agreement and the objectives. What could be lacking? And they again repeated, the most important thing is lacking. I said, what? The spiritual factor. And I said, and what is that? And they said, unless the humans treat nature as an equal and understand that the oceans have life and that the mountains have life and that the rivers have life and that they have rights also, and they have, you have to see them. Now that Silvia was talking about dignity and respect, we should treat those living phenomena with respect and dignity.
Absolutely.
And I was really very much impressed. And every time I tell this story to anybody who was present, and it was exactly at this time in the General Assembly when the SDGs were approved, and when I tell them about this spiritual factor, they all say, you're absolutely right, or the indigenous communities are absolutely right. And I think these are the type of lessons that we need to embrace and put in practice as soon as possible, because time is running out. And I have a question for Carlos, because you have been studying the Amazon, the communities in the Amazon, and you're a scientist. What does it take for science and the indigenous communities to accelerate this sort of partnership? Because the scientists and the indigenous communities, until very recently, were completely separate things. Now they are starting to learn from each other. How can we accelerate that process?
Shortly, and we go to the opening. She's calling us.
Yeah, very quickly,
Okay.
President Santos. We are developing a study in the Amazon we hope will succeed, which is to create the Amazon Institute of Technology. And we want to bring the indigenous knowledge to the Institute of Technology to do capacity development of thousands of students per year, also to do capacity development of indigenous people. So we really want to bring indigenous knowledge for the educational system all over the Amazon. We hope we will succeed in creating a Pan-Amazonian Institute of Technology.
Wow.
But the world needs to transform the way we look at education. Our education system is an industrial revolution type of education. That's why the spiritual part has been taken out, because it's about materialism. So we
Sorry.
need to go
We need
back.
the way of educating from indigenous peoples.
I was galvanized by Mark Carney. Do you know him?
Yes,
In
I
his
know
book
Macaulay.
Values. He
Yeah.
may not be the first person to say it, but he pointed out Amazon, Jeff Bezos's company, is valued by the economy by the hundreds of billions, whereas Amazon, the greatest ecosystem on the planet,
Except
has
the
no
ocean.
economic value until it's logged, mined, dammed, or grows soybeans or cattle or cities.
Agree.
If that
Using
doesn't
this
show
name-
you that the driving force of economics is crazy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Marketing.
And another very short experience with the indigenous communities. I took them my development plan for them to give an opinion. I
This is the
said,
Kogi.
The
You took it
Kogi,
to
yeah.
Not
Kogi.
We are
SDGs.
supposed to go
And they
up
said,
there. They're waiting for us.
and they said, no, we cannot read that because we have completely different
Visions.
definitions of what
Yes.
development
Yes.
is.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Totally agree.
Right.
The
Yeah, that's what we need. Not,
the way of
Okay,
development.
I thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your leadership.
The ocean
Thank
is the
you,
biggest
President Santos.
ecosystem